Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Matthew Worwood.
And my name is Dr. Cyndi Burnett.
This is the Fueling Creativity in Education podcast.
On this podcast, we'll be talking about various creativity topics and how they relate to the field of education.
We'll be talking with scholars, educators, and resident experts about their work, challenges they face, and exploring new perspectives of creativity.
All with the goal to help fuel a more rich and informed discussion that provides teachers, administrators, and emerging scholars with the information they need to infuse creativity into teaching and learning.
So let's begin.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Fueling Creativity in Education podcast. And today we have a really special episode because we are featuring one of Matt's special Teacher Roundtable episodes. So Matt, I'm going to ask you a few questions. I know you've done one other Teacher Roundtable, and that one was around teaching during the pandemic, which we had on the show maybe a year ago, was it, or 2 years?
Yeah, I think it was about a year ago. Yeah, one or 2 years ago.
And now you've been working on this next roundtable. Tell us about it and what inspired you to do this roundtable.
Well, first of all, I wanted to do a documentary to kind of capture the creativity that I saw taking place within the teaching profession during the pandemic. Logistics, budget, resources, it wasn't possible to really tell that story in the way that I wanted to tell it. But I was in this situation where I was doing a workshop with a group of teachers. I want to say it was maybe summer 2022, possibly. And they're basically in this around a round table having lunch, and they're exchanging stories from the pandemic. And I'm listening, and I said, "This is it. I want to capture this particular conversation." And then I said to myself, you know what? This actually isn't too hard of a kind of documentary type film to make, because it kind of still allows me to express my passion for exploring ideas through filmmaking. And with the power of AI and some of the great editing tools that we've got, it's a great passion project because it's a full day of filming. And then in terms of the post-production, when time's available, you can edit it within a few days, really. So it's quite a nice, simple project to put together. So that's where it came from, and I hope to continue it so long as I don't make it too complicated in the future.
I love that. And I love how you're describing how much easier it's become over the last few years. And hopefully we'll get to see more of these teacher roundtables. I know we've talked offline about these as well in terms of what you might do for the future, but we'll save that for later on. So for now, Matt, can you tell us what to expect from this teacher roundtable?
Well, what's great about it, number one, is because it is, obviously primarily dialogue. I think it fits really well with the podcast. So we're doing this little intro video, and then what you're going to hear is the transition music that we have on our podcast, and then you'll have the round table. You just won't have the visuals. In terms of what we're talking about, it's about how the teaching profession, or maybe individual teachers within a particular context, have responded to generative AI since OpenAI released ChatGPT 3.5 in November 2022. So we actually filmed it last summer, and the first part of the conversation was really getting teachers to reflect about what was their initial thoughts when they started to interact with this tool. And then one of the things that I like about it is, one, I was really struggling to decide whether or not it should be K through 12 educators again, or it should be university educators. So I actually it was a little bit more complicated, but I put together, a group that are made up of both K through 12 educators and university educators. And I was really surprised to hear, for the most part, even though they're talking about challenges within different contexts, and obviously they see maybe a different role or responsibility based on where they are in the education system, a lot of the themes and topics that we're talking about were really similar. So it made for some really great conversations. One of them is critical thinking. The other one is, this great theme around how do we as humans evolve with these types of technologies. But then the other thing that I do in the film, and I've got two different versions. So I've got a shortened version and a more extended version. So the more extended version does this part a little bit more justice. You're going to be just listening to the shortened version today. But what I did was I created these two AI scenarios. One was based more in kind of like the K through 12 environment, whereas the other one was based in a university environment. I don't want to spoil it, but I kind of literally walked the participants through this vignette that I created about, hey, I want you to imagine there's this student, and the student's this, and this is what they did with AI. Let's have a conversation about it. And it made for some really good conversations. And both of the vignettes in my mind are probably things that are already happening or could happen. But it made for some kind of really fascinating, reflective topics of conversation, and I do think that's really what the roundtable is. It was a conversation with us kind of reflecting on where we're at and where we might be, and like everything, we revisit the question of what's the role of the educator when there's so much access to information. It was a fun conversation.
Thanks for that overview, Matt. Now, if you're listening and you want to listen to the shortened version, then keep going with this particular audio. But if you'd like to actually watch the video and watch this interview, this roundtable, then I recommend that you go to teacherroundtable.com, which we'll link in the show notes, and you can actually watch the video of this, or you can find it on YouTube. And Matt, why don't you provide them with that information?
Yeah, so teacherroundtables.com. And what's great about the website is you've got the option of looking at the trailer, the shortened version, which is about, I think, 34 minutes. It was a little hard to bring that down because we had so many people in the conversation. You got the extended version, which is about an hour and 5 minutes, minimal editing. But then also you've got different clips. And you've got clips from the teaching during the pandemic, as well as you've got clips from this latest roundtable as well. So the website is definitely probably more organized in terms of accessing the content in different ways, but on the website, you'll be able to link to the YouTube channel as well.
And again, if you want to watch the Teacher Roundtable, continue to listen to this episode or check out the website at teacherroundtables.com. My name is Dr. Cyndi Burnett.
And my name is Dr. Matthew Worwood. Okay, so to get started, we're going to focus on November 2022, because that was when OpenAI released ChatGPT 3.5 to the public. And I thought it'd be interesting to start off with you, Melissa, because in that position where I'm going to make the assumption within your school community, there's an expectation that you're kind of at the forefront of technology. What was your kind of initial response when you first kind of interacted with this platform?
Well, initially, the first response that I actually engaged with as part of the school community was with my technology team. And the original questions being asked were, how do we block it? How do we keep it out? How do we make sure students aren't using it? And, what can track it? What can find it? And teachers were coming with a lot of questions about, how do I identify AI? How do I make sure that kids are getting credit for work that they did and not what they had some computer generate for them? And a lot of the initial PD was around using the tools that we had, like Draftback and version histories on Google Docs, to see the student thought process behind the writing, and not just, it's kind of like showing your work in math, right? I want to see that you wrote it piece at a time and how it came to be, and not just what you gave me in the end. A lot of the PD that I've been giving in recent days has shifted much more to, how can AI help us to provide our students with a tool rather than how teachers need to combat it.
We have this problem because of the ethical nature of ChatGPT, and students are using it. So it's teaching them how to use it as a tool, as you say. But the problem is the authenticity of the work. So we're trying to say you have to be an authentic writer, but how do you get them to be an authentic writer when they have ChatGPT or some other form of AI at their fingertips? So what we have now gone back to is something that's like pre-AI, almost computer, which is they have to write everything by hand. So then we get to know their voice. We get to know what they're capable of doing. Or if they're on a doc, they have to write in that doc from the start or we won't accept it. So we are having those conversations around, ethical work and what is your work practice and processing. And this is teaching them a new way of writing, or at least English teachers, the way we like to write. But that becomes important, in using, ChatGPT as a tool, but also, citing ChatGPT as a tool. If you're going to use it, you need to cite it.
I think the difference with college for me is that you have two main groups. You have one that wants to do their work properly no matter what. And then you have another group, which is always going to be there, who wants the grade, wants to get the degree, but doesn't care how much they learn or how to get it. I think that doing that in high school with the handwritten works, I think in college, in a setting where they are choosing to be there, you're always going to have those two groups. And I think the support of teaching them how to use AI properly to do their work, I think benefits both.
I'd love to follow up on that too, because for me, it's a little bit different. As an educator, I'm teaching creativity. The way that we're teaching is always a process. And I want to go back to that word that you were saying, because creativity is a process. So there's no way to, well, I shouldn't say there's no way to duplicate the process in generative AI, but one of the things that I've started to do with my students is figure out ways that it is beneficial to us. I always say it's about using the tool and not letting the tool use us. And that's one that I think I have to teach my students first, which is anything you do is a process. You are the creative being. You can use AI in conjunction with your own creativity, but you're always starting in your mind and on paper first. So I tend to think of it as a tool that we need to be educated on ethically, and then we can choose to use it in whatever capacity works for our own creativity.
When I graduated high school, we were writing papers like handwriting, and then we were also using computers. And then fast forward 5 years later, I'm in my master's program in 2022. And then I go and start observing other teachers in the classroom, and everyone has Chromebooks. And I'm like, this is so interesting. But I think that's just like a post-COVID era of Chromebooks and everyone using, Google Classroom. As a literacy teacher, we do a lot of like reader theaters, and I'm teaching them how to read. And text to speech has been, super useful. And all these different ways of taking ChatGPT and being like, okay, can you create a reader's theater? I'll put in my student names and give them a topic, and then it'll just generate this like amazing thing. And it keeps them so engaged and intrigued, and they love watching it pop up on the screen.
When you first start, you asked the question, what do I think and how did it change everything? The first thing I thought of, I've been in emerging technologies since the 80s. And every time a new technology comes out, there's fear. There's old school versus new school conversations. Having been down this road many times, my first thought was, okay, this is going to change the way I teach immediately. Like that Christmas, that in between semesters of that year. What has switched for me, Matt, was I teach mainly juniors and seniors of college. Their employers are going to be using this technology when they leave UConn. So my first thought was, A, teach them how to use it ethically, which really put an emphasis more from my teaching perspective on teaching the students critical thinking skills, more than how to use the calculator or how to do this. If I could teach them how to think critically more, and more of the point of emphasis every day in my lectures, that would be a huge value add. So it really changed my approach from maybe how to do some analysis, how to get some data, how to put a PowerPoint presentation together, more into critically thinking, what tools am I using? How am I using the tools ethically? And then freeing up time to be more human.
You'd referenced the critical skills. I'm just wondering, is that something that we think is already happening in the K through 12 level? Or is it a case of let's kind of like, in essence, do the accountability thing and then teach the critical thing? I'm just curious.
I don't think we've done a very good job establishing the foundational skills and education necessary for tackling the internet, let alone all of these additional new tools that have been thrown at us in the last 5 to 10 years. I sat on the committee writing the digital citizenship curriculum for my district. And that was within the last 10 years when we finally sat down and said, this is what we're going to try and teach. And whether it's being implemented with fidelity has yet to really be understood. But at the high school level, we see this huge issue where kids never got these lessons. Kids never, we assumed they grew up with it, so they knew how to use it. We weren't necessarily teaching things anymore. And it's interesting to see something as simple as typing skills that high schoolers don't have, because we don't have the time in school to teach that anymore. And it's assumed that because everyone has a computer, they know how to do it. And then COVID came along and we went 1-to-1 overnight, literally. And many districts are still trying to do that, yet are struggling to put policies in place to manage the computers, to address student behaviors, on top of social media, which is another layer of digital citizenship that is greatly impacting the school environment. And now we've added ChatGPT, and there's just so much changing that the lessons, the foundational skills that need to be taught at the young level, like these are things that, you really need to address here, because by the time you're in high school, the classes are so content-based, right? What time do we have in our 8 classes that are math, science, English, business? Like, they have content they have to address. And I absolutely agree that the classes need to implement those skills as part of their lessons. And that is part of my job. And we try to do that. But things are changing so quickly, and there's barely enough time to write the content-based curriculum than actually apply ISTE standards and all the other technology skills that need to be taught explicitly, and then to train teachers who don't know the technology on what those skills are. There's so many layers that go into actually doing it well or at all that it is virtually impossible to keep up with right now.
Yeah, it's going to get worse.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen it since the 80s. If it used to be 10 years between new technologies, then 7 years, then 5, now it's like every quarter. So it is overwhelming the human experience, which impacts teaching, impacts jobs, it impacts kids. We can't keep up with it. That's where we're at right now. That's what I was talking about earlier. I think a big point of emphasis should be on the human evolution as to try to adapt to the technologies they're coming along. For me, that's where the big challenge is going to come. How do we evolve as humans to deal with this?
The question of ethics and wanting to understand something, right? That critical thinking that we've alluded to, and the ethical considerations of what goes into the work kids are doing, is something that we need to lay foundationally for all students, right? We want them to care, because ChatGPT is a very powerful tool, and it can make things easier and richer, but it could also take away the value of having done something, because there was no thought process. It was just, do this for me. And I think we can give students opportunities to feel more success for those who are disengaged. I think it's a great opportunity for students to see what might come out of it, to have models that sound and connect with those students that would normally take teachers tons of time to create. And now you've gotten, some of those disengaged students who didn't care because it wasn't about them. It wasn't speaking to their background. So I think, those different students need to be dealt with in very different ways with ChatGPT, and taught different things based on their personal level of background and interest in actual learning.
And I would just add that it's not only ChatGPT. These are the same students who are coming from the world of Google and other places where they don't have to remember that type of information. They see it, they access it, it's done, and they can move on to the next thing. Grammarly, it checks and, it fixes the mistakes for them. So they don't have to remember why they need the comma. It's just like, oh, Grammarly put it there, so I need the comma, clearly. The question really is, what is it that is their goal? In the college setting, they're paying for that education. What's the return on the money?
To add on to that, I love everything you said, you shared. I had a student when this first came out last spring in class ask me straight up, John, between all the technologies we have now, why am I paying to go to college? Why are you here? I could learn everything between YouTube, Google, and generative AI. Why do I need you? And I didn't answer the student right away. I actually took that as, that's a great question. And the takeaway for me was, I'm still evolving, is what's the value that I, as a professor at UConn, can add that they couldn't get at home? Because these students were home for 2 years. That really is causing me self-reflection to say, when I stand in front of the room, what am I bringing as a value add that makes a student want to show up in a classroom in Storrs, Connecticut and pay what they pay?
I wanted to just share some AI scenarios. And, these AI scenarios are really just kind of like see if we can focus in on a particular theme as we look to wrap up this conversation. So I'm going to hand these around. And I'm going to give you a few minutes to review them as I read them out. And I know this is the first time you've seen them. This is a scenario involving Jake. Jake is a high school student. This week, he had an especially large amount of reading assignments from various classes, leaving him feeling overwhelmed. In his English literature class, the students are assigned to read a long chapter from a classic novel and prepare an assignment based on their interpretations of the chapter and what they think the author is trying to communicate. To manage his workload more efficiently, Jake decides to take a different approach. He snaps pictures of the chapter, uploads the image into a large language model, and asks questions about the chapter. The LLM helps Jake understand the key themes, character motivations, and narrative techniques used by the author. Using the insights provided by the LLM, Jake works with it to outline a paper that he then uses to write about the chapter and complete the assignment. When Jake returns to class, he shares his experience with his classmates and teacher. He explains that he found the process more efficient and engaging than reading the chapter himself. The problem arose when one of Jake's friends said, "I can do that for all my readings."
There's two big things that I have seen come out of this kind of use of something like ChatGPT, where it's like, tell me what this was about, right? One is that cold read, that you're not always going to be able to take the conversation, the newspaper article, the speech that you've been listening to, and run it through ChatGPT to have something else explain to you what the point was. What was the message of it? Is this a fantastic way to bridge the gap for those who might struggle with that and might need to see an example of it or a model of it so they understand what those words are supposed to look like or how an explanation of that goes? Sure. But at the end of the day, if that's not being used to help them build the skills to identify those ideas and themes and understanding in a cold read text, okay, great. You used it for chapter 4. You see what it's supposed to look like. But now can you figure out chapter 5 on your own? If it's a stepping stone to being able to think independently, then I support it, because sometimes kids need that concrete example and teachers can't necessarily make a model for every single thing they're asking kids to do. The other thing that I struggle with as an English teacher in particular with this is endurance. Kids are losing the endurance to get through an entire novel. But with the advent of the internet and now ChatGPT, there's this idea that everything's supposed to be a quick answer, that I'm not supposed to have to take time and read through it and actually experience it, which with literature is really problematic. And that also includes the ability to engage with language that is not easy to digest. So the endurance of being able to experience language and think about language and read for long periods of time is problematic. We even see tests like the SAT making passages shorter and shorter so kids can demonstrate their reading ability rather than ability to endure long passage readings. So I think we're struggling with the ability to keep kids engaged for long periods of time. And this is another add to that column that takes away from the value of being able to spend time and struggle with something.
We've got Marlo. You've joined us.
Yeah.
From a student perspective, what's your take?
It comes back to a bit of my background, I think, going to a high school where they kind of put us in different tiers. And so where I was, my work, I came to class and I colored in a map. I wrote my essays and we had 3 one-page essays for the whole year. And then I got to my senior year and we had to read Lord of the Flies and we were all perplexed. So when I read this, my immediate feeling was good for you. Because going back to all those students back then, it was just we had to do what we had to do to graduate to survive, if that makes sense. But when I have AI or I have something that can critique my papers over and over again, that gives me a sense of relief that I can measure up, or I can at least show up to the starting line, if that makes sense.
Do you get everything out of a novel by reading a summary from AI? No, you don't get everything. And that's because the author of a book or the writer of a movie, they sequence everything very, very particularly so that you read it in an order and you get surprises on the next page. And you cannot possibly get that from a paragraph or 2 or even a few pages. It's just different. You're reading a different book at that point. But there's also the argument to be made, if your friend asks you, hey, have you seen Star Wars? Maybe you've watched some clips in a different order. Or maybe you've watched some of the trailers, or maybe you've heard things about the characters. Do you still have an opinion to be made? Do you have a different perspective? Do you know anything about Star Wars? You definitely know things about Star Wars, for sure. But you haven't seen it the way that George Lucas wanted you to see it. There are multiple ways you can use this, and it is down to the intent of the student, and they will learn no matter what if they want to. But I think that it's not a good or a bad thing at this point. It's very much in the middle.
All right. So I've got another scenario. And in this scenario, it's a little bit more focused on the university classroom. And so we've got John, you've come back to join us. I'm going to hand this scenario out. And again, I'm going to give you just a little bit of time to review it. This scenario is Emily, who's an undergraduate student majoring in animation. For her senior year thesis, Emily decided to produce an animated short film that explores complex themes of identity and transformation. She used AI technology to assist in the production process, including generating some of her characters, objects, and background scenes, and creating visuals for her storyboard. Emily's transparency about her use of AI tools earned her admiration from some peers and skepticism from others, including some faculty. The problem arose when Emily completed her animated short film in 3 months ahead of schedule.
This one is awesome and very tricky. And I think I'm going to come at this from a place of an artist, which is it is never my job as an educator or an artist to limit or censor or change how any art student or design student chooses to share their story or their work, right? So if Emily's goal is to, again, taking into account that this is her, I believe it's her thesis project, right?
Senior
so
project.
This is her senior project. She owns this. This is her narrative. This is her work. It's not my place to say you can and can't use this tool. I also want to commend Emily for her transparency, because there was an opportunity for her to not share that information. And because she's using the tool and she's transparent with the tool, she can help teach others how to use the tool, not use the tool. She can weigh in on the ethical use of those tools. Like, unless we use these things, even if we don't agree with some of the negative aspects of them, if we don't use them, they will use us, right? If we're not part of this conversation, we can't figure out where this tool is going next. While I can understand the individual narratives that other people might have with Emily using AI, I think as both a university educator and an artist, it's my role to support her in her learning. And if she wants to learn this, then I commend her for doing that, as long as it is ethical.
Yeah, I agree with everything Sam says. I'm in the camp that supports Emily. I think transparency, ethical use, as long as she's doing that, we're good. And I think one thing I would then work with Emily on is, okay, you finished 3 months early. Yeah. What do we do with those 3 months? Did you take better care of your health? Did you eat better? Did you go for walks? These lessons learned as Emily goes out into the workplace, I think will be valuable for her in learning how to use these tools correctly, ethically. I have no problem at all with it. I think Emily, if she follows all these similar things that we're talking about, when she goes into the workplace, she's more prepared to be successful at a place of employment than other people.
Okay, so they got 2 months off. Does the system allow that? Let's sit down and have a conversation. What else you do? Does the system and culture say, well, I'm going to go for a walk for February, and take an entire break off? Would we do that, or would we start trying to pile on more work, right?
Well, that conversation leads me back to the 80s when I got into this field. With emerging tech and eventually the internet, boom, we have to work 3 days a week. Everybody's going to be home 4 days a week. Well, that didn't happen. What happens is the marketplace puts more work on. So we have to do a lot more with that time. So that is part of your conversation. Are we going to give them more work now to accomplish more because they had that month off or that 3 months off because they got it done quicker? Or is this an opportunity where we can teach balance, introduce mental health, introduce taking better care of ourselves a little bit into the conversation?
If I could speak about this, being an animation student, in in my personal opinion, it's always been, even if it wasn't pressed on by teachers, it's always been a case of always do more.
Right.
In our heads, we're always trying to make the best work or the work that will get us seen by employers.
Yeah.
And, if we have 2 spare months, how are we using those 2 spare months to make it even better? How are we polishing our work? We come to class some days and we're bragging about how little sleep we've gotten the night prior. It's a badge of honor for some of us. And, we come to class and we're speaking about like, that's the industry,
I think the mental health is so, so important. And I do think there is more of a focus on it nowadays. But I think also it's up to the individual to figure out their own kind of journey with that. And some people need a whole week to reset after doing a big project. And some people just go and work on the next one right away. And they're already doing 2. And I think that I went to South Korea a week ago. I got back. I was there for a month. And I went to a Studio Ghibli exhibition. But I saw it took over 8 years for this guy to do. And I have to think about this Emily situation, about her using AI to finish 3 months earlier. I can only imagine in that time, decades ago, how much quicker he could have accomplished the same thing or something similar. It would be different with AI. And how many more things he would create, or maybe how much more time he'd spend with his family, or what he would decide to do with it. So I think that, like you said, it will change, and it's going to change people's lives. And like you said, it's going to change you. I just think that students should be taught the best way to deal with it, both mentally and also ethically too.
All right, to finish up, I'm going to ask everyone to identify one wish list item that generative AI is going to bestow for your teaching and learning experience, and one major concern that you have.
I think that one thing I'm concerned about is something I see in the industry a lot now, just from a bird's eye view, is that writers, just as one example, aren't given enough time to make something. And I think that could potentially get worse with people almost feeling like they're kind of forced to use the new technology and not their own methods, which I want to support. And I think that yes, people should be taught how to use this, and they should feel like they are able to and allowed to. But also, the old processes, which aren't that old, right, because it's 15 months, those processes are very, very authentic and important. And I don't think that people should have to change that. And I do think with this increased speed of everything being done, I do worry that people are kind of going to be forced to do things at a certain time and rush their regular process and adapt to it, even if they don't want to.
I'm going to start off with this. I think the benefit of like coming to UConn, coming to School of Fine Arts, I've gotten to work with such a diversity of students and staff and people, and learning alongside them and seeing the art they make is like, you put a little bit of your soul into everything you make, is what I've learned. And so my fear with AI is losing authenticity and the humanity of everything that we have, like when it comes to the arts. Because when you go to a museum, you see everything. And even if it's like 100 or like 500 years ago, you can see the soul of like someone that painted that sculpted that. And then to think of like AI, like creating everything, it's a little bit heartbreaking, I think.
I think going back to the 2 types of students, I think my biggest fear would probably be looking at 2 different pieces of student work and trying to figure out what the intent was behind each, and am I going to grade them in, on the same basis of using AI, when one student might have put a little bit more thought and depth behind what they were trying to do versus one student just trying to rush and get it done. I think my fear is just like, how am I going to figure that out? How am I going to gauge, does this student really want to do well, or are they just trying to use AI as a fast track to get it done? So how am I going to realize if they're using that for the right reasons?
I am not worried about the students in DMD that I teach. The fact that they're exposed to these conversations, I'm not worried about them. I'm worried about the students who don't have these classes, don't have these opportunities to talk to professors and peers that we do, and can do critical thinking to understand these technologies. Those are the students I worry about.
authenticity in the voice. I mean, when you lose that, you sort of lose like the humanity in whatever it might be, in the piece and the creation. It doesn't matter what it is, the design. And the other thing that goes along with this, it's like the biggest fear is that it's not regulated, that it's coming so quickly that no one knows what it's doing. So the AI is outpacing everything. So we don't know where it's going. Even if it's like the head of Google said that, like, it grows and it advances so fast that no one knows what it's doing. And I think that's what scares me the most.
I'm a creative and I love making things, and it's quite simple for me. I really look forward to how this is going to help me do that and create my dream movie or my dream even music, and become a better writer and animator and learn it better. I'm just looking forward to how I'm able to figure out how to use it. And I already know that I'm going to try and, put my best foot forward when using it. So I'm just excited for the future with it, actually.
I'm kind of excited to see how it goes, where it's like helping students more with like neurodiversity. I think, like with auditory processing disorders and such, because when you're in a classroom and you're not really sure what to do, or you're at that disadvantage, how AI can really help put you at the starting line with the rest of your peers would be really helpful.
I think going off of exactly what you're saying in terms of like differentiating instruction in the classroom and meeting students' need, like where they're at and what students need the most, I think AI is going to be super, super helpful. Creating lessons and taking the same topics and kind of simplifying them or making them more advanced if need be, in terms of reading and, creating content that meets them where they're at and where they need to be. Because as educators, we can only do so much of that on our own. And I think that's definitely a really great point.
What I'm excited about the most, Matt, is the things that we used to have to teach, how to use this and how to do that, the rote stuff. With AI and the next generations of AI, if they can use those tools and get that stuff done quicker, now I can spend more of my time being a mentor, a leader, connecting, being a real teacher in the sense of what we used to think teachers were hundreds of years ago.
One thing we didn't talk about that it does do now that I think it will just continue to grow is it helps with multi-language learners. That it does really accurate translations from things, even like flyers and presentations, that really help support that population in school.
My biggest fear and my biggest hope are probably the same thing. And that is that my biggest fear is that I am preparing my students for a world that doesn't exist. And my biggest hope is that I'm preparing my students for a world that doesn't exist. And the reason I say it that way is because they're going to have choices, right? I think we've uncovered that today. And some of them might have these choices to use the old ways, right? I teach animation. Some people will want to draw on paper. Some people will want to use AI. But I think overarching that seesaw again of hope and fear, I definitely want these jobs to be there for my students. And that is both, I think that might go more toward the side of fear. I think that students will have to stay competitive, and they'll have to learn the tools and maybe feel that crunch, but creativity will never die.
As I finished this conversation, it felt very different than my past roundtable discussion on teaching during the pandemic. Although it raised similar themes, such as the importance of relationships, it was clear that this conversation was just the beginning. First-generation large language models like ChatGPT have only just started to demonstrate the disruptive possibilities for the future of teaching and learning. Some of the challenges explored in the discussion continue to build on the struggles of the World Wide Web and the emergence of social media, emphasizing the drastic need for critical thinking skills in the classroom and throughout society. They also highlight the importance of ethical and informed educational practices, focusing on how technology can support teaching and learning and minimize harm to mental health. Generative AI will transform and disrupt different sectors of our society, and in education, it is likely to intensify an already existing question. What do students experience in the classroom that they can't experience outside with access to a personal device and the internet? This question speaks to the culture of formal learning. It is a complex question with different answers depending on how you view the goals of education or the values that you place in the schooling system. However you approach that question, one thing that is clear to me is the enduring need for a passionate teacher and high-level, human-centered creativity.